How's it going, you awesome bunch of bakers? Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. Welcome back to another video. Today, I'll show you a unique take on the sticky bun. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. If you love cinnamon rolls, then you are bound to love sticky buns. The way they are made is by baking cinnamon rolls on top of a bed of caramel and nuts. Once cooled down after baking, the tray is inverted, revealing a delicious caramel and nut layer on top. I decided to make a Halloween version, with dough made with pumpkin and the caramel topping with pumpkin seeds instead of nuts. So let's see what we need to make this recipe. We'll need some white bread flour, yeast, salt, sugar, butter, and some pumpkin or butternut squash puree instead of water. For the filling, we'll need some butter, cinnamon, and sugar, just like for a cinnamon roll. For the caramel sauce, we'll need some butter, sugar, maple syrup, double cream or heavy cream, and a little bit of salt. And we'll need a bunch of pumpkin seeds, but you can certainly use nuts instead, it's up to you. Some chopped walnuts would go really well here. As for the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, a brush, a whisk, a little spatula for spreading on the filling, a rolling pin for rolling the dough out. We'll need the pan for cooking the caramel and for toasting the pumpkin seeds. And we will need a baking tray. I'm using my Lloyd's Pans pizza pan. I like it because it will give the batch of buns nice straight edges. We want to line the baking tray with some baking paper. Cut a piece of baking paper slightly larger than the tray. Flip the tray upside down, place the paper on the tray, then trace the edges and the corners using your fingers, and fold the corners over. Now flip the tray right side up again, and the paper should go right in there. And that is how you line a baking tray without cutting diagonal lines from the corners. All the liquid in this recipe will be replaced by pumpkin puree or butternut squash puree, whatever you decide to use. To prepare it, first we need to cook the vegetable. Peel it, remove the seeds and cut it in large chunks. Place it on a baking tray, cover it in tin foil and bake it for 1 hour at 180 degrees Celsius or 355 Fahrenheit. You could also boil it, but baking it will intensify the flavor. Cook it until it's so soft that you can easily mash it with a fork. You can certainly mash the whole thing with a fork or use a potato masher. I would also suggest passing it through a sieve to get rid of any large lumps. But if you own a food processor or a blender, then use it. It'll be your best option. I have my super handy, super powerful NutriBullet. I always make sure to cool down the ingredients completely before using it. This blender is so powerful that I'm always paranoid it's going to explode on me. Cooling the ingredients down is just a good precaution. And anyway, they need to be cool enough for us to be able to make the dough. If you don't want to mess around with making vegetable purees, you can just make this dough with water. You'll find the correct quantity in the written recipe. Okay, leave the pumpkin on the side for now. Let's make the filling. Combine the sugar, the cinnamon, and the butter in a small bowl and mix until smooth. I'm just getting this out the way because it's the easiest thing to make. But don't refrigerate this mix because it will be impossible to use if you do. Okay, now let's move on to making the caramel. You could of course mix the dough and then make all the other things while the dough is fermenting. But for the purposes of filming this video, I do it this way. Okay, in a medium-sized pan, combine the sugar, the maple syrup, or honey, the double cream or heavy cream, basically the fattiest cream that you can find, the butter, and last but not least, the salt. Give it a quick mix and set it up on high heat. This is a super quick recipe. All we need to do is get the mix up to a rolling boil, and once it starts actively boiling, we need to cook it for exactly 1 minute. Yes, 1 minute might sound like a short time, but do not be tempted to cook it for any longer. The longer you cook it, the harder it will set once it cools down. And if it's super hard, you might not be able to separate your buns. I don't know about you, but I like my buns to be separable. Okay, as soon as the timer is up, remove the pot from the heat and pour the caramel into your prepared baking tin. Now wash the pot and use it for toasting the seeds. The seeds won't take long to toast either. Around 5 minutes will do. You want to shake them and stir them to prevent them from burning. Once they have developed a little bit of color and they're smelling nice and toasty, they're ready. Pour the seeds in an even layer all over the caramel. I had quite a lot of seeds left over because I wasn't sure of how much I would need, but the written recipe for you has the correct amount. Okay, the topping's ready, we can leave it on the side for later. Let's move on to making the dough. In a large bowl, combine the puree, the yeast, the salt, the butter, and the sugar, and then give it all a good mix. Finally, add the white bread flour and mix it to a dough. I will be cold fermenting this, but you can certainly ferment yours at room temperature. I've left the instructions in the written recipe. I prefer cold fermentation because it develops more flavor and it makes the dough easier to handle. It is the superior baking method and it's not that hard to plan these things ahead of time. We're aiming for a final dough temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. My dough turned out quite a bit cooler than that, and if yours does too, leave it out at room temperature for half an hour before refrigerating it. But if it's at the correct temperature, refrigerate it right away for 30 minutes and then pull it out the fridge and give it one fold. To perform the fold, dust the dough with flour, drop it out on the table with the smooth side down, flatten it out, then fold the edge over the middle, go around in a circle to reach point where you started. Then flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, and back in the bowl it goes. If you're going with room temperature bulk fermentation, I would suggest folding the dough twice at equal intervals, 30 minutes in and then 1 hour into bulk fermentation. It is pretty loose and sticky, but if you are cold fermenting it, pop it in the fridge for 18 to 24 hours. Okay, it is the next day, the dough is puffed up nicely, and we can move on to final shaping, which, if you've made cinnamon rolls before, will be quite familiar to you. Dust dough generously with flour, pop it out on the table with the smooth side down, flatten it out by hand, and then roll it out with a rolling pin. Roll it to a large rectangle. Try to make the edges as straight as you can. Don't worry too much about measurements. The longer you make it, the more swirls your rolls will have. Once you have rolled it out, grab the filling and dot it evenly all over the dough, and then spread it out in a nice even layer using a spatula. If you don't have a spatula, you can use your dough scraper. Leave a little edge of bare dough at the top and brush it with water. We'll use this for sealing up the roll. And speaking of the roll, now we can roll this thing up. As you roll the dough, there is one inevitable thing that will happen. The loose piece of dough at the front of the roll will become narrower than the roll itself. To fix it, you can either pull the loose piece of dough out sideways to make it wider, or you can push the roll in to make it shorter. But whatever you do, once you reach the end, seal it up, and then place the roll on a chopping board. If the roll has turned out a little bit wonky, you can roll it back and forth to make it more even. In order to be able to easily pull the rolls apart after baking, we must brush the dough with melted butter. It is a slightly messy step, but it's well worth it. Okay, next we can cut this log into 12 equal pieces. First, slice it in half, then slice each half in half, and then cut each quarter into 3. Next, arrange the rolls on the bed of caramel. Once you have arranged them all, press them down using the palms of your hands. And finally, these bad boys are ready for the final proof. Cover them up, leave them to rise for around 2 hours. The final proofing time will of course depend on the temperature of your kitchen, and if you did a room temperature bulk fermentation, then the final proof might take only 1 hour to an hour and a half. But whatever you do, during the final hour of fermentation, preheat the oven to 160 degrees Celsius, 320 Fahrenheit, fan on. If your oven doesn't have a fan, heat it up to 180 Celsius, 355 Fahrenheit. You should adjust it by about 10% between the settings. Having the fan on makes it essentially hotter. Okay, once the rolls are looking nice and puffy, they're ready for the oven. Even though they are not very tall, they will take some time to bake at around 35 to 40 minutes. They will not burn because we are baking at quite a low temperature. If they are for any reason starting to get too dark on top, you can cover them with some tin foil for the rest of the bake. Okay, once the rolls are fully baked, remove them from the oven and leave them to cool down. At this point the caramel is still liquid. If we turn them upside down right now, it will all leak out. If you let them cool down completely, the caramel might set too hard for your liking. That is if you want to serve them tear and share style, in which case you can put the rolls back into a warm oven to soften it up a little bit. But I actually like the caramel just like this. I can easily cut it into squares using a knife. And it is still very soft, but there you go. That's how you make super unique sticky buns. If you're not into pumpkins in the dough and pumpkin seeds on top, you can always check out my other sticky bun recipe. And you can use the method described in this recipe to make them without kneading and with cold fermentation. And don't forget to check out my other Halloween recipes. The black charcoal focaccia, the pumpkin shaped loaf, the black charcoal donuts, and those are only the ones from this year. So what do you think of these sticky buns? And have you tried the original ones? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.